Let me just start where Senator Coons left off. So you have said that you had significant concerns about the authorization or the application for the Fisa warrants, right? You said earlier when it came to political bias, when you move to the Fisa warrants, things get murkier. I believe that was the word you used. Is that correct?
Correct.
Because you can open an investigation. I say this as a former law enforcement official myself. You can open an investigation pretty easily. You've testified today that it can be done quite easily. But when you actually start taking action, start taking steps, start gathering evidence, start surveilling Americans, that's when actually real questions arise. And your testimony today has been, and in this report, is that when that happened, there's potential concerns here about political bias. Is that correct?
We have actions taken here that were not consistent with the rules, the practices, the policies, and what we couldn't reach a conclusion on is what motivated that.
Yeah, I think that's very significant. I mean, let me just be honest with you. Here's the question that I'm struggling with. Which is worse? Is it worse to have a foreign government trying to meddle in our elections? Or is it worse to have our own government meddling in the election? Because that's, I think, exactly what this report shows. It shows that our government, the most powerful law enforcement agency in the nation, the FBI, effectively meddled in an ongoing presidential campaign. And the thing that gets me is you expect it from foreign governments. I'm not saying it's good, but I'm saying that you expect it. They've been doing it for years. Russia's been doing it for years. We know they tried to do it this last cycle. China has been doing it. Others have been doing it. And we know what steps to take. We've got to take them more effectively. But when our own government does it, how can the American people have confidence? And what do we do? I mean, what do we do? And there's one actor here, I think, who has not gotten the credit that they collectively deserve, and that's the Democrat National Committee. I just think, I've heard my friends on the other side of the aisle complain about Hillary Clinton's campaign and how ineffective it was and how the DNC didn't do a good job in 2016. I beg to differ. This is the most incredible. The DNC pays for the Steele dossier, solicits the Steele dossier, and then gets the Federal Bureau of Investigation to go get FISA warrants, surveil an American citizen, surveil a presidential campaign, all on the basis of this manufactured garbage that they paid for. I mean, that's extraordinary. That has got to be a first time in history. In fact, let me just ask you, Mr. Horowitz, are you aware ever of another presidential campaign being targeted by the FBI during the campaign like the Trump one was, to your knowledge? Has this ever happened?
To my knowledge, but I wouldn't suggest I'm an expert on.
But to your knowledge, no. You're not aware of anything like this. So, and I'm correct in thinking that the Steele dossier, the Fusion GPS dossier, was solicited by and paid for the DNC. I mean, that's correct based on what we know.
The Clinton campaign or the DNC, it was ultimately learned by the FBI that was the case, or that came to be their belief.
And then, so we get the Steele dossier. It's fed to the FBI. The FBI goes and asks for these FISA warrants, which have all of the problems that you have articulated and that my colleagues have drawn out, including sometimes outright fabrication of evidence in these FISA applications. And then, not only does the FBI get a surveillance program ongoing, effectively, of a presidential campaign during cycle, but they also get, the DNC also gets, news stories written during the campaign about the surveillance program. In September of 2016, there's a story about possible counterintelligence investigation of the Trump campaign. In October of 2016, there's a story about the FBI investigating the Trump campaign, and we know on that last one that that Steele himself was involved. Is that correct? In October,
that's correct, and the FBI actually ultimately knew that he was involved in the September one as well, that you're referencing, I believe.
And yet, what action did the FBI take when they knew these two facts?
Well, in November, they closed him, but then met with...
What did the Crossfire Hurricane teams take? What steps did they take when they knew this about Steele is what I should ask.
I'm sorry. Well, what happened is they closed him as a source in November, but that's when the meetings with Mr. Orr started, where he was the conduit between them.
Right. So he's still able, the FBI still takes the information just via a DOJ conduit, which is its own separate, unbelievable problem. But yet still, they're taking all this information on board from Steele, even after they know that he's totally incredible. To me, this is the untold story of the 2016 campaign. And I don't know who at the DNC hatched this, but I suppose they ought to, maybe it's take a victory lap, but certainly they should be remembered for it. To get the FBI to pursue surveillance of a rival presidential campaign and then into the newly elected president's term, I think it's just extraordinary. It is absolutely extraordinary. So let me ask you this. Are these individuals whose misdeeds that you have documented here in this report, the members, I'm thinking of the case agents, other members on the Crossfire Hurricane team, are they still, to your knowledge, working at the FBI?
To my understanding, some are, some aren't.
And why are those who are, why are they still there? What's your understanding?
I think you'd have to ask Director Wray.
And indeed, I think we should. What about the case agent who directly misled the DOJ intelligence attorney, Office of Intelligence Attorney, about Carter Page's relationship with other intelligence agencies in our government, who directly misled the OI about that? Is that person, to your knowledge, still at the FBI?
To my knowledge, that person is still there.
And is still actively working, maybe is still acting as a case agent,
that I think
to your
you
knowledge?
have to ask.
What about procedures at the FBI? To your knowledge, what procedures have been changed at the FBI to date to prevent something like this from happening?
I think all that I'm aware of is what's in Director Wray's letter that's attached here. But certainly there are far more reforms and changes that are needed to address all of our recommendations. That's a good beginning, but there's a lot more to be done.
I will just say in closing, Mr. Chairman, that I think it is an extraordinary thing when the most powerful law enforcement agency in the country, maybe the world, is able to effectively intervene and influence a presidential election at the behest and with the cooperation of another political party. I mean, I've been saying for a long time that, there's no collusion in the 2016 campaign. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think the collusion was between the DNC and the FBI, and it is, if we don't change something here, I mean, to see FBI Director Wray go out and say in the face of all of this that he doesn't think that this vindicates the FBI and he doesn't think there are any problems, I, for one, don't know how any American can have confidence in that institution and in the integrity of our elections if things like this can happen. So thank you, Mr. Horowitz, for the work you've done. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Horowitz. And again, thank you to you and your team for your work. Do you agree that the FBI meddled in the 2016 election?
What I found is what's in this report. I'm not going
Did you
beyond
find
the
any
letter.
evidence that the FBI purposefully intervened to affect the outcome of the 2016 election?
We've written about what they did here and in last year's report, and I'll stand on those findings and those findings alone.
I didn't find any conclusion that the FBI meddled or interfered in the election to affect the outcome.
We did not reach that conclusion.
You didn't reach a conclusion about the FBI intervening in the election or acting out of political bias, correct?
I would say I'm going to stick by this report and last year's mid-year election report on what it did, because there are specific findings as to specific individuals.
Let me ask you about some of those findings, but let me just say at the very outset, I know you're a career official, and I want to pay tribute to all of the law enforcement officials, particularly in the FBI, because I can see how some of what's been said about them might be severely and unfairly demoralizing. We have your back. We have your back. When you're out there enforcing the law with weapons pointed at you, and sometimes they are firearms and sometimes they are political weapons, we should have your back. So some of what's been said here, but also in the larger realm of public comment, I think has been severely a disservice to our law enforcement and to the United States, because we are discouraging able and dedicated young people from joining your ranks, and we need them. And I say that as a former United States attorney and a state attorney general who has worked with some of the best and some of the less best. So let me ask you a few questions about those findings. President Trump has said repeatedly that the FBI, quote, tried to overthrow the presidency. Did you find any evidence that the FBI tried to overthrow the presidency?
No, what we found is, again, laid out here in this report.
Well, is there any evidence that you found that the FBI tried to overthrow the presidency?
No, we found the issues we identified
no,
here. That's
correct?
what we found.
Did you find any evidence that the FBI tried to entrap anyone?
As a legal matter, since we don't see any actual cases come out of this, I think the answer is no.
There was no entrapment, correct?
Yeah,
Did you find any evidence that the FBI tapped the phones at Trump Tower?
no. The only wiretapping or the only surveillance we found was what's laid out here.
Did you find any evidence that the FBI planted informants in the Trump campaign?
No.
Did you find any evidence that the FBI tried specifically to entrap any of the individuals who were the focus of their investigation, namely Manafort, Flynn, Papadopoulos, or Page?
Entrapment's a legal term when you're moving forward on a criminal case. We didn't see that in this case.
Correct. There's no evidence here of entrapment. But the president has claimed that there was entrapment, that his phones were tapped, that Carter Page may have been used as a spy. Did you find evidence that the FBI put spies in the Trump campaign?
I'm going to speak to the terminology used at the department that we oversee, which is confidential human sources. And we did not find evidence that the FBI sought to place confidential human sources inside the campaign or plant them inside the campaign.
Would you agree with the contention that the Russia investigation, including the Mueller investigation, was a quote-unquote bogus narrative?
We don't address the Russia investigation or take issue with its handling at all in this report.
Well, in fact, you found or agreed with Mueller that the Russian government attacked our democracy in a sweeping and systematic way, correct?
We add a couple pages in here as background to reference not only the Mueller report, but other reports as well, including congressional reports on that issue.
Did you show this report to Attorney General Barr before it was released?
Yeah, as standard process, we provide this to the Attorney General and to the FBI Director.
Did he suggest any changes?
He didn't suggest any changes, and, you know, we
He
got
didn't
some...
suggest any corrections?
Well, he found a few typos and other things that he suggested we might want to think about.
So you must have been surprised by his attack on you and your team.
No, I had some idea he wasn't completely supportive of that.
Do you think he was fair?
He's the Attorney General of the United States. I've had cases where situations where there have been disagreements between myself and leadership of the components. And
Well, I want to
he's
give
free
you a
do
chance to defend yourself and your team, who have done a highly professional job here, 19 months, hundreds of witnesses, hard work. Do you think this attack on you and your team is fair?
I'll say this. My defense of our team and our work is we stand by the report. Nothing I've heard changes our view. The department, the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, the FBI Director, whomever, is free to disagree with my conclusions.